everyone. I think my mics are showing. All right, let me get it together here a little bit more. Hello. Woo! Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Yay. All right, it's Monday. I hope you're having a great holiday today. Good morning, good afternoon. Hey, everybody. All right. I'm just making sure that we are streaming well every place that we should be. Hello to everybody watching here on Facebook and on YouTube, watching live. Thank you so much for joining me today on your holiday. If you're in the United States, we are celebrating the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., which is always exciting. Great to be doing that today. I'm making sure that we're coming through. And it looks like we are. If you're here live watching, go ahead and say live in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me live if you're watching live. And if you catch the replay, go ahead and say replay in the comments. Yes, I am. I am streaming live. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me live. Thank you. All right, everybody, let's get started. So today we're going to be talking about healthy baking swaps. So when you are building your healthy lifestyle, you are changing some things around to make some choices a little bit healthier. There are specific things you can do when you're baking to either add more nutrients or take away some of the not so great things that might be in some of the choices we're choosing to bake. So this is looking kind of weird. So yeah, if you're joining me live, hey Patrika, thanks for joining me, and thank you for saying hello so I can make sure that this is this is working good. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. My name is Theresa Horne. I'm the founder and CEO of Sisterhood of Strong. We help you live a healthy lifestyle. We support you in getting fit, being strong, and choosing joy. Today we're talking about healthy baking swaps, and I'm gonna go over at least 7, maybe more than that, tips for making your baking choices a little bit healthier. And so I think whenever we're talking about making healthier choices, we have to go back to what we're defining as healthy. What do we define as healthy? And when it comes to food, there's really no definition of healthy. So when you're in the grocery store and you're making choices and something says healthy, blah, 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 healthy fruit snacks, I don't know. There's no definition of healthy. So there's no real standard of what healthy is. So marketers, the people, big food, they can put healthy on just about anything. And there's no real standard for what that is. So when you are choosing your food choices, you need to define healthy for yourself. And then when you're making your choices, you want to then decide, does this food fall into what I'm defining as healthy or not when we're choosing it? And the marketing, the packaging, all of those things, they're trying to get you to buy that food. That's their goal. Their goal is not for you to be healthy necessarily. So we want to make sure that we are not falling for the hype when we are making our food choices. We're actually looking at what's inside the food and what we are defining as healthy for ourselves, and then making our choices based on that. So with that in mind, We're going to talk about some of the places that the pitfalls that we fall into when we're making food choices, and specifically we're talking about when we're actually baking for ourselves today. So the first place that I want to talk about is sugar. So we're talking about baking, and that could be baking anything, but I think probably when we think baking, we're thinking of things like muffins and cookies and biscuits and um, maybe cake, brownies, things like that. So, specifically baking, even biscuits or cornbread, things like that. The first place is sugar. And we, right now, there's quite a lot of information actually coming out about sugar and the fact that sugar causes inflammation, and how we know inflammation in our bodies is a problem. When our bodies are chronically inflamed, it's not good for our organs. It's not good. It's not good for ourselves. So sugar causes inflammation, and so when we're baking, often there's sugar in the recipe, and we can take the sugar out or replace the white sugar for something else. Now, what I want to say is um, our bodies recognize sugar in all different forms. So when we take out white sugar and replace it with something else, if it's still a sweetener, our body is still going to recognize that this is a sweetener. It's the way that sugar, our body responds to the sugar, that may be different. So the faster the sugar hits our bloodstream, the more our body is going to react. So we want to kind of slow down that process of how our body, how the sugar is hitting our bloodstream. If you can think about it like that. So you can replace sugar with a sweetener. You could replace sugar with an artificial sweetener. We think about things like, the popular name would be Splenda, things like that. So that's one way you can replace sugar. Another way, and the ways I'm going to suggest today, are actually things like honey or maple syrup. Those are replacements. Stevia is a replacement. Those are all natural, right? So honey, maple syrup, stevia, all natural replacements for sugar. They also are still a sweetener, and your body is going to recognize them as such. The difference will be the way, hopefully, if you're super sensitive to sweeteners, your body's probably, it's gonna sugar, or sweetener is sweetener for your body. But the difference should hopefully be how fast your body has to respond to it. So we want to slow down that process. Honey, maple syrup, date syrup, that's a good one. Those are going to have more fiber, have more nutrients in them that hopefully will slow down the reaction. So another popular one now is monk sugar. All of those things, you want to make sure to pay attention to how your body responds to those things. But those are alternatives to white sugar. Date, like I said, date syrup. There's another one that I was just thinking. I want to say agave is not all that great. So I would not really, I wouldn't invest in that. Agave is really tasty for like cooking. It's got a different flavor to sweeten things, but as a replacement for sugar, you might as well just use not sugar, but like I would say a better option would be maple syrup or honey. Cane sugar is less processed. So the problem that we find with like white sugar is it's highly processed. Cane sugar or raw sugar, they're less processed, so it's better than white sugar, right? So, but if we want to be going with the most, if this is highly processed and this is not processed, we want to we want to be using things that are have minimal processing. So cane sugar is better than, processed white sugar, but it's not as good as honey or maple syrup. And I know, I guess the other thing is to really make sure that if we are buying our honey and our maple syrup from the grocery store, that we're reading the label. Like I said, when we first started talking about, you want to see what's actually in the product that you buy. If you just look at the label, it might say all natural honey, right? And then you look at the label and then you see that, it doesn't have all honey in it. Like, it's not, it may have, I don't even know what would be in there, but you want your label to say raw honey and it to be, that's the only ingredient. So even better if you can get your honey locally, because then it will, even the bees will have, will be local to you. So they'll have the they'll have pollinated or from the plants in your area, so you'll get that extra benefit, right? So or even your maple syrup, if you can get that's local to you, that's going to be the best, and it's going to be 100% maple syrup. Those are the things that you want to go with. So that would be what we consider probably the best, and then stevia, and then what else would be next? Maybe monk fruit, and or even getting the sweetness from your baking from, well, we're going to come to that, but like actually from fruit. So there we go, sugar. And I kind of led up to that, or not having maple syrup or honey in your baking products at all, but using fruit to be the sweetener. Think about things like dates, actual using the date, right? So putting it in a blender, and depending on what the recipe is, I think I've done a recipe before, this like a brownie recipe that has dates as the sweetener. Or what's another one that we do? I think there's a banana bread recipe that just has bananas as a sweetener. The longer you keep bananas, the more sweetness comes out. So some super overripe bananas in making a banana bread. And so the banana itself is the sweetener. So using the actual fruit to sweeten a product when we're talking about making a healthy baking swap. All right, so we talked about different sweeteners to replace sugar. That can be like a honey or those kind of sweeteners, actually, or using the actual fruit. Next, let's talk about eggs. And again, going back to that definition of healthy, eggs themselves I would consider healthy. But if you need to eliminate eggs, if you know that eggs are a source of inflammation for you, then, and you're eliminating eggs, there's a couple of options. Right now, there are, different products out on the market that you can buy. Just Egg, I think, is the name of one. Is it called Just Egg? I think it's Just Egg, which my son really likes. He is eliminating eggs, and he really likes the taste of that. He will actually like scramble that, because he's not doing soy either. So that's one option. The other option is to make an egg with water and chia seed, or water and flaxseed. And I think it's like a tablespoon of the seeds to 3, I think it's 3 to 1, to actually make, doesn't sound very good, but it's like a congealed little mixture, but it's a binder, because when we're baking, eggs hold the product together. So it serves as a binder, and you can use it as a replacement for egg. So again, that's a healthy swap if eggs are a cause of inflammation for you. And not everybody is has that issue. So eggs themselves aren't necessarily bad unless you know that they cause inflammation for you. So that would be another place where you can swap things out. Oils and butter. So if you're trying to swap out oil, butter, again, oils, not all oils are bad, not all butter is bad, but if you're trying to swap those out, butter and oil have a lot of calories. So if you're trying to lower your caloric intake, eliminating oil and butter is a really easy place to get your calories down. So, what can we replace, swap out when it comes to oil and butter? Think about things that are healthy fats. So, we can swap avocado. If you're baking something, chocolate with chocolate in it, avocado actually pairs really well with chocolate. And if somebody, when the first time I heard that, I was like, I don't think that sounds good. But it actually works pretty well. So, avocado is something you can swap out. The ratio of swapping out avocado for butter is 1 tablespoon of butter for a half a tablespoon of avocado. And again, you want it to be like not a ripe avocado, or you want it to be a ripe, you want it to be soft, right? So avocado is a good swap for butter. Another swap would be applesauce for oil, right? I think it's a half, let me look at my notes. It's a half a cup of oil. Yeah, so it's 1 to 1, half a cup of oil, half a cup of applesauce. So applesauce is, I think that's like the first swap that I even tried. So oil for applesauce, that's a good swap. What's another swap? Pumpkin can work, or I've done sweet potatoes. I like the sweet potato one because that's another source of sweetness. I don't really find pumpkin. It's, should be sweet, but sweet potato is a nice swap. I've got a sweet potato muffin that I make that I really like, and I use sweet potato and applesauce. So those are all swaps you can do. Let's see, I went over. So sweet potato, pumpkin, avocado, applesauce. Yes, applesauce for oil. And then also like prunes or dates can work as well. When we talk about things that are really dry, prunes and dates, they definitely change the texture, but those are things you can use instead of fat and oil. So there's lots of room to play in that. Now, if you are changing a recipe that you've already been doing, if you're swapping things over, then I would actually maybe test out recipes that actually have these things in them before you start to swap things out. So I think when you're first beginning to use things like pumpkin and applesauce and prunes and dates for sweetness and to replace the oil, to use a recipe or find a recipe that is written that way. Once you get more comfortable, you can start to swap things out of old recipes. For me, like where I'm at the point where I'll look at a recipe, and usually it's a recipe that I grew up eating, and then I'll play with it a little bit, right? So, and generally, I usually start to pull back on the oil or pull back on the butter. So if it calls for half a cup, then I'll do I don't know, like 4 tablespoons. First I'll play with that and then, look at the consistency of it and then maybe add the applesauce. But I would say if you're first starting to find recipes that actually call for things like applesauce and not oil, or they call for prunes and not oil, that's a great way to begin with changing as opposed to swapping things out. Unless you're really adventurous. Right. So if you're really adventurous with your baking, then go all ahead, go all out and just, you can start mixing it up a little bit. The last thing I want to talk about is actually with the flour. We want to, again, we're talking about healthy. We are trying to eliminate things that are highly processed, and flour, white flour, That's definitely an area where it's a highly processed thing, something your body's going to convert to sugar really fast. And so we want to try to stay away from white flour. Really, we want to stay away from white flour. There's really no reason to be using it, right? So even whole wheat flour, you look at the label, you want to see what they're defining as whole wheat. I don't use that really at all. Unbleached, all that, same thing, same pot. You just want to try to eliminate that. And what could we use instead? So I think right now there are so many options to have things that are not white flour, and the temptation is just to pick up something that says gluten-free, right? You want to pick it up, and there's so many options now. You still want to read that label, because the first option, the most popular option for gluten-free right now, and usually that's something that it'll say on there, it'll say 1-to-1, is not going to be all that terribly more healthy than a white flour, because the first ingredient, the first flour substitution, is probably going to be white rice flour or brown rice flour. Those flours are going to be processed as sugar by your body pretty fast, because they're highly processed. When you see white rice flour, again, that is a highly processed flour. One of my sons is gluten intolerant. He has a sensitivity. And so for him, he doesn't, I will say this, he clearly does not care about the health thing about flour. He wants his food to taste as close to regular flour as possible. White rice flour has a texture and taste that's very similar to regular flour. So that is what that gets you. White rice flour gets you a taste and texture that's similar to regular white flour. It does not bring you any health benefits, right? Or they're very, very minimal, if any. What we want are things with more fiber. We want things that are not highly processed. So the great substitutions would be things like almond flour. That's a great substitution for white flour. Almond flour, coconut flour. Coconut flour is has a lighter texture, and it actually has more of a flavor, in my opinion, than almond flour, but it's definitely a lighter texture. Almond flour is a more dense flour and more gritty. Right now, you can get a product that is, what do they call it? Oh, highly, I can't even remember fine, that's the word they use, fine almond flour. And that's even a lighter texture, but you want to make sure that you are reading those labels and being clear that the only thing in the product is almond flour. Because what starts to happen is they will label it almond flour, and that is the main ingredient, but they will put other things in it. So if you just want almonds, you want to make sure that you're reading and it just says almonds, right? If you just want coconut, you want to make sure that that's what's in the flour. Again, we always need to read the label, even though it's labeled on the outside or on the front, it has almond flour or oat flour. You want to make sure that what's in it is just the oats, ground oats, right? Because it could be that they've added other things in there. So that's our last place to swap out: almond flour, coconut flour, oat flour. Chickpea now is something I've seen. There's so many options. The other thing you can swap out when we're talking about swaps is tapioca flour. Like I said, white rice flour. Those don't necessarily have any greater nutritional value. If you're trying to get away from white flour, tapioca flour, white rice flour, those are going to be good subs, but they don't necessarily have added nutritional value. When we talk about almond flour, almonds have protein in them. Almonds have more fiber. Those are things that are going to be beneficial for you. Tapioca flour, white rice flour, they don't necessarily have more fiber, but they don't have gluten. So if gluten is what you're trying to get away from, right? This is why it's important we know how we're defining healthy and what we're looking for in our food. So if gluten's what you're trying to get away from, then you could use those swaps, but they're not necessarily going to give you more fiber. They're not going to necessarily add protein to what you're eating. So those are really things, important things to think about when you're making your food choices. And that's why reading labels is so important. So we'll definitely be doing a show on reading labels coming up. So many choices with the flour. I know I'm going to go ahead and look in the comments here and see if there's any questions. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody. Let's see here. Yes, I can't wait to work out tonight either. So many choices with flour. When my son, who's 16 now, we first had to eliminate gluten, like there were not a lot of options. Now there's so many options, and we need to make sure that we're still continuing to read the label to be sure that we know what's actually in the food. I saw a pizza crust yesterday at the grocery store, and it was a cauliflower pizza crust, and I was like, wow. And it was a shelf stable, and my son does not like cauliflower pizza crust at all, but I actually do. And so I was like, oh, this would be great. So I looked at the pizza crust and the ingredients, and the first ingredient wasn't even cauliflower. I can't even remember what it was. I took a picture of it, but it was not cauliflower. In the it was like the fourth ingredient was cauliflower. So you really have to pay attention to the label, the actual ingredients, not the outside cover label. You need to actually look at the ingredients, right? Coconut flour. What about using that? Coconut flour is great. Coconut flour is great. And again, we need to know what we're defining as healthy and what our bodies recognize as causing inflammation. So, right, if you have a tree nut allergy, coconut flour might not work for you. Cauliflower pizza crust isn't bad at all, right? And it definitely depends on the actual pizza crust. I have found some that I felt like are really good, and some that I'm like, no, really pass. Like California Pizza Kitchen has a delicious cauliflower pizza. It's really good. Now that's in the actual restaurant. I haven't tried, I think they have a frozen one as well. I haven't tried that one. There's another popular brand of cauliflower pizza that you can buy the pizza itself. I can't remember the name of the brand, but the pizza itself you buy, not that great. But if you just buy the crust and then make the pizza yourself, it's a lot better. All right, so that's it for our 7. I've gone over actually way more than 7 baking swaps today. Thank you for joining me. We are doing a training in the Sisterhood of Strong crew this Thursday on tracking, some hacks and tips for tracking your food. Tracking is so helpful. It gives you a whole another layer of understanding about what you're actually putting in your mouth. And it's a great discipline to have and information to be able to collect on yourself. So I highly suggest tracking if it's not a trigger for you. We'll be doing that training in the Sisterhood of Strong crew Facebook group. So it's a free training for members there. So if you aren't a member of the Sisterhood of Strong crew on Facebook, you can go on over and join. And that's going to be our training for this month. I think that's it. Thank you so much for joining me today, everybody. And we'll be back next Monday. We're going to be doing a movement training next Monday. So I look forward to you joining me there. My name is Theresa Horne, founder and CEO of Sisterhood of Strong. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.